Hello and welcome to another Cork and Taylor Wine Podcast. Luke Taylor here, and I'm here with a lot of wood. A lot of frickin' wood. It's very woody in here. It's freaking cold too. God, I feel like I'm back in Canada. But this is the place, man. This is the original. I'm here with Andrew Wright, winemaker of Merryvale. We're going to talk wine. We're going to talk about growing up in a desert.
Yeah.
I think you're the first winemaker I've ever talked to that grew up in a desert, but you're born in Iowa, so it's kind of weird.
Yeah, it's kind of a strange story. But,
Confused.
It's a good one.
Yeah.
Maybe. To me, it is.
Yeah, and you're a Cyclone, not a Hawkeye.
It's important. It's
Yeah.
an important distinction.
It's funny, huh?
It's fun.
What do they play for in football? They play for something, don't they? Is it a barrel? No, that's Minnesota.
No, I don't even remember.
Yeah.
We left Ames. I was too young to remember, and they've never been good enough to be on my radar in Arizona. I guess my dad, now with the Big 10 or the Big 12 packages, you could watch that stuff, but
Yeah.
growing up in Arizona, hard to do.
Well, the Big 12 and the Pac-12 will be together at one point.
Yeah.
It's all going to just be
Exactly.
one big freaking league.
Yeah, for sure.
It's kind of a joke, but whatever. We won't go there. So you studied history.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's kind of a worthless degree, kind of like communications over here.
Yeah, no, history was going to be a great degree to go to law school. Which
that makes sense.
Which was my original goal, was to become a person who argues professionally. Now I just argue with myself in the cellar about blends and stuff. But
who wins the argument? I talk to myself all the time.
The wine
It's
always
weird.
wins, I guess.
Yeah,
but,
the wine always wins.
It depends on my mood, I suppose. But yeah, no, I was gonna go to law school, and then I didn't really grow up with wine. My dad is a big beer drinker.
Well, you're in Iowa.
Yeah, exactly.
Do they even have wine in Iowa?
I don't think. Well, they make some now. Yeah.
Okay.
It's I actually stopped.
Is it fruit wine?
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of that, but there's also like those weird like Cheval Blanc varietals that are not like Vitis vinifera, but they're the other one.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty interesting time. Oh God, my favorite Iowa wine is called Downtown Saturday Night. So, being familiar with the Midwest, you know that there's not really that much going on Downtown Saturday Night.
No.
So you have to drink a bottle of that, and I think it gets you ready to go.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
That's cool. Okay.
But yeah, I was gonna go to law school, and then kind of fell into wine by accident. The girl I was kind of dating at the time at the end of college was we just kind of started. We actually graduated college, drove around the country, kind of camping, and stumbled onto the Finger Lakes region because my roommate from college was from Ithaca.
Okay.
And
good old Ithaca.
Oh, dude, and it's such a great place. But I was poor and just graduated college, and so it was like $5 to park to go see like the gorges and the waterfalls. And I was like, well, if I just keep driving up a quarter mile up the road, I'm sure I'm just gonna pull over on the side and hike back, and pull up half mile up the road or whatever. And it's the Finger Lakes region, which I had no idea what the Finger Lakes region was. I didn't even know they made wine in New York. Mm-hmm. But so that completely scrapped my plans for the rest of my kind of road trip. And then I just kind of went all up and down the eastern seaboard and down into the south, going to the wineries that I never knew existed outside of like, Charlottesville, in North Carolina for more like the fruit wine scenario. And by the time I got back to Tucson, which is where I went to school, U of A, I kind of caught the wine bug and then became friends with Kent Callaghan, who is kind of the notorious awesome winemaker down there in Sonoyta, which is about an hour southeast of Tucson.
Okay.
And everybody thinks of Arizona as being this huge desert, which of course it is, but it's only about a third of the state. And there's different types of desert too. So down there it's
There's different types of desert.
Yeah, it's high desert. So it's about 4,500 feet elevation, give or take. And so it's not like saguaro cacti and stuff like that in 120 degrees. It gets down below freezing at night. It's more
snows,
Mediterranean.
right?
And it snows, and it's red volcanic soil and really cool area to grow kind of Mediterranean stuff. And so one of the professors at U of A in the 90s was doing some research in the 80s. I think Dutton was the guy's name, if I recall correctly. Anyway, started planting Cabernet grapes down there. And man, it was the 90s when Robert Parker called Ken Callaghan the best kept secret winemaker in the United States. So started hanging out with him, and then one thing led to another. So I did 3 years in the vineyard, working kind of from the ground up, planting vines all the way to tending vines to XYZ down in southern Arizona, which is kind of strange. Mm-hmm. And then I decided I wanted to kind of pursue actually winemaking. So I moved to Sedona and did a vintage at Arizona Stronghold, working for Maynard Keenan.
Oh, nice.
When the last year that he co-owned that property. So that was.
And
really
before
fun.
I forget, I'm still stuck on this. Are you still with that girl? Do you still have this girlfriend?
No.
Okay.
We have both moved on, I think, to greener pastures. But,
okay, just making sure.
Yeah.
I mean, it is 2022, so I mean, you can't assume anything nowadays.
It was almost 20 years ago, which is kind of crazy to think about.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. You looked her up on Facebook, didn't you?
No, actually, I got off Facebook.
Yeah.
I turned 40 in a couple of weeks. I was like, oh man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't want to see what everybody else in life living my best life.
Oh man, no man. It's like everybody on Instagram. It's like it's like the same 8 wines that are bottles that are empty, and I'm like, okay, I see too much of that in my 9 to 5. You know what I mean? So
yeah, the only reason I'm on Instagram and Facebook is because of the podcast, but more so Facebook because of that. It reminds me of birthdays.
Yeah, no,
same. That's the greatest thing about
for
Facebook.
Me, like my family back in Iowa was on Facebook, so like that's how we stay in contact. But yeah.
So go back. Sorry, you went to Sedona. Yeah, sorry about that.
No, you're good. I went to Sedona, and it was my first kind of time working in a wine cellar, and it was so much fun, man. We were, like making wine in cargo shorts, listening to like weird British metal, just kind of learning the ropes from these kind of like basically like crazy dudes out in the desert in Arizona making wine.
And how are the wines out there?
Oh, amazing. They're really nice. Yeah, there's a minerality and a freshness to them. I think a lot of it's because they don't tend to be over extracted. Mm-hmm. They don't tend to be over oaked. They're kind of classic in that sense.
It's not like Napa.
It's a little bit not like Napa.
Oh, dicey out loud.
That pendulum swinging, though. We'll talk about that.
Yeah.
But they're really, I think they're captivating in their own way. They definitely have a sense of place. Like I can smell and taste an Arizona wine. I know it's from Arizona, which is kind of interesting in the same way that you would from Napa too.
Right.
I mean, that's mainly, I didn't grow up on that wine obviously, but I think in my formative years, my 20s and 30s, like definitely drank a lot of those wines. And there's some beautiful, beautiful examples. I mean, the 2003 Callaghan Mourvedre is still like one of my favorite wines of all time. Is like the first wine I ever had that took me to kind of a different place that like kind of opened up that other kind of dimension in my mind where I was like, okay, this is what the like kind of like the classical purpose of wine is. I mean, other than to obviously kill the germs in the water.
Right.
So yeah, Arizona wine, spectacular. Some of them can be spectacular, I should say that.
So what is, I guess, so you've got California, and California has been king for years in America, in North America too. And then you have the kind of the increase visibility and awareness of Oregon and Washington wines. What do you think is holding back Arizona wines?
It's Arizona.
Well, but
no, I joke. I love Arizona.
I mean, you could play golf, you can hike, and you go wine tasting.
Yeah, no, it's very true. I think Arizona gets, I mean, a lot of Phoenix is like strip malls and urban sprawl and kind of like cultural wasteland, so to speak. But there's a lot of like, I think about the restaurants like Bianco, F&B, places like that, the wine programs there. Places like San Reckoner, obviously, just Pavle Milic, who is F&B, just won James Beard Award, or the chef won James Beard Award. So there's a lot of really great stuff.
The food in Arizona is fantastic.
It's crazy. It's awesome. And like I lived in Tucson for 8 years, and that's such a great food town.
It is.
It seems reductive to say or obvious, but the Mexican food is amazing, and like just everything.
Shocker, right?
So vibrant. I know, right? So that's it. Like the locals like really are into wine, but I think on a larger national scale, there's so much competition, and the market's so saturated. I think with a lot of like cheap stuff from California,
right?
Like Trader Joe's and stuff like that. Which I'm not a dig on that. I mean, for sure, I grew up. I mean, I went to college too and did that for sure, and all that kind of stuff. But
Rolling Rock.
Yeah.
Dollar Rolling Rock Thursday night. So
I think there's a lot of wineries in Arizona too that kind of lean into like the older crowd, sweeter wines, and so it kind of holds the region back, I think, for recognition. But there are some awesome producers making really great stuff, Spanish varietals, Mediterranean stuff too. Yeah.
And it's funny, you worked in some wineries that make some very cheap wine, Bond and Harlan.
Yeah, they're known for their
inexpensive everyday drinker.
Their sweet Saval Blanc.
Yeah, very sweet drinker.
Yeah, no, I did my vintage up in Sedona, and my advisor from law school was like, "Hey, so are you coming this semester?" And I was like, I really enjoyed my time in the cellar, and I kind of want to go do a vintage in Napa and just see what that's like. And
so how does that work? So you're in Arizona.
Yeah.
You've got obviously a resume of working the vintage or in Arizona. I mean, it's not Napa.
Sure.
So what's the process? Do you just, this was 2012, so it wasn't like 100 years ago.
No.
Just
10 years ago, yeah.
Believe it or not, same like COVID's been going on for 10 years. But anyway, so how does that work? Do you just email somebody? Do you try to connect with? I mean, I guess if someone's listening, the 4 people in Moldova that listen to it in Sweden, we got followers in Sweden and Japan. I don't get it.
Shout out Europe.
Yeah, shout out Europe. Yeah, exactly. What's the process of trying to get into the wine business as a winemaker or cellar master or?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. It's for me, I found it was a matter of supremely dumb luck, and then also just confidence in my own ability to kind of see how far I could go. So knowing that I wanted to kind of come into to Napa, I just checked wine jobs a bunch, put up like a filter on wine jobs to alert me about, basically just looking for like a cellar rap position, intern position. And there was a posting on wine jobs that was like 2 sentences, and it was so completely vague. Didn't say who it was, didn't say what the pay was, didn't say anything. It was just like this really vague. And I was like,
that perfect.
I was like, that is so vague. That is either Sutter Home or it's going to be somebody who does not so high end they don't want to put their name on it.
Exactly.
And I took a flyer on it, sent my resume, and I got a phone call from an Italian man named Marco Gressi, who's still one of my good friends. He's amazing winemaker for the Napa Valley Reserve now. He was the assistant winemaker at the time. And he called me and he was like, oh, you're from Arizona and you're making wines in Arizona? And so I kind of explained that to him for a little bit, and he's into the story, and he's a bit of a renegade. And so he kind of liked that. And then so he said, I'll never forget it. He's like, well, I'm talking to 2 people from Arizona and you're one of them. And I said,
what?
And I said, well, I'm the one you want, so don't talk to the other guy anymore. And he's like, he's laughed at my joke or whatever, and then offered me the job. And then so I just kind of packed up my...
So did you know where you were going?
No idea.
But come on.
I mean, seriously? I looked it up on the internet, like the Napa Valley Reserve. I was like, okay, because
I feel like this is a Craigslist story.
Yeah,
for sure. You show up and there's just a guy with a knife.
No, yeah, it's pretty true. I was wearing Keen sandals and cargo shorts when I rolled up to the Napa Reserve in August of 2012. Very Arizona desert ratty for sure. Definitely did not at that time have the pedigree of the winemakers who come through that through those doors. But I love wine, and I love learning, and I love the thing about wine where it's hard work, it's science, it's agriculture, it's philosophy, it's culture, art, food, sex, all of those things in one.
Drugs,
and,
rock and roll,
all the things we like.
Yep.
So for me, being around
20 years ago, I'm 45.
I turned 40 in 2 weeks. So I'm trying to have the slow descent.
Yeah, I'll tell you, you'll notice your body will change. Yeah. A lot of things will change when you're 40. But it's not really 40. It's more like 42, 43, and then 44. It's all good, though. I mean,
the good news is
it's great. I'm not going through a fucking midlife crisis.
We have the wine to get us through, I feel like. So
yeah, I mean, you're around it. I mean, it probably seeps in your body. Well, I love the thing with COVID now. If you drink, a glass or 2 a day, you're less likely to get COVID. I mean, you'll never get it.
You drink wine and you smoke weed, and you're never going to get COVID, apparently. That's like the new thing.
Yeah, supposedly.
It's California immunity.
Yeah, well.
Plus the jab.
Yeah, you guys have like the highest numbers. Figure that one out. But anyway.
Man, science.
So you showed up at the Napa Valley Reserve. And is that a bank or a winery? What is Napa?
Man.
I've never heard of Napa Valley Reserve.
See, that's the thing too. I didn't know what it was either, and not a lot of people do. It's because it's in the Harlan stable. So the Harlan family, of course, Bill Harlan being kind of like one of the godfathers of modern Napa. Owner of Harlan Estate, Bond Estates, Promontory.
Yep, Promontory. Yep.
Everyone knows those 3. Promontory being the newer jewel in that crown. But the Napa Reserve is the private club. It's an exclusive wine club for worldwide members. I think I left in 2019. They had about 600 members at the time. And what they do is the Reserve is amazing because it's kind of like, I don't know, it's like the greatest wine co-op, at the highest level.
Really?
Yeah. So all the members buy in and they take a certain allocation that's of the estate wine. They make about 5,000 cases a year to satisfy the members' allocations, and that's all they make. So you can't find the wines on the broad market, and if you do, it's like a backdoor on the internet, and those wines.
Is it a different label, different name?
It's a different label. Man, I have one in my office. I should have grabbed it. But it looks just like the Harlan. It's the same kind of style, right? So it's that
Harlem. It's not Harlan. It's Harlem, like
Harlem,
a Brolex.
It's the Globetrotters. Basically.
Yeah, it's like the Brolex and Brolo.
I like that.
Yeah.
I saw LeBron James's kid is trying to trademark Bronald yesterday. I thought that was hilarious. Oh, God.
Hey, I'm from Akron. Well, I live in Akron.
There.
LeBron, he's a wine drinker.
Yeah, he's a huge Harlan fan. And
is he really?
Yeah. So those guys, like, they love it. So it's like basically like the world's most exclusive wine club.
Yeah.
And then about 50 of the members do their own private blends. So,
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. So Marco and I used to, I mean, he still does it. I don't, obviously, because I'm here at Merryvale now, but we used to sit down and you were talking like, you know, I'm really not, I think I've signed some NDAs, so I can't say, but like,
Right.
you know, who's who in tech and,
Yeah.
you know, finance from around the world
Yeah.
are members there. And it's kind of right below Meadowood, right out the Silverado Trail.
I hopefully it didn't burn down like Meadowood.
No, actually it didn't. It survived, which is really, really great. So yeah, tragic about what happened to Meadowood, of course,
Yeah,
but
awful.
the reserve survived and the vineyards are great. And yeah, so it's a great place to learn. It's a biodynamic farm as well. And it's all the winemaking team. So it's the director of winemaking is Bob Levy, of course, the legend Bob Levy, who was a winemaker at Merryvale in the 80s.
Where we're sitting.
Where we're here now. Yeah. So my mentor, and I work, I should say, so I was at the reserve. I fell in love with high-end winemaking. You know, I you know, from my Arizona kind of like desert roots
Arizona, yeah, exactly.
to like, you know, the opposite end of that coin within the span of 12 months. And I just fell in love with it. I found I was pretty good at it. I was, you know, coming from Arizona and, you know, living in Tucson for 8 years, I was really familiar with like kind of like the Mexican American culture and the Mexican community and that kind of stuff. So I fit really well with the cellar guys and kind of the vineyard guys. And I think that took me a long way, to be honest with you, because I didn't come out of UC Davis like a lot of the kids do. No, I shouldn't say kids. Sorry.
Yeah, well, they are.
Yeah, right.
They are.
I can't believe I'm almost 40. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
So yeah, so for me, it was a matter of working and I'd spent 3 years in the vineyards in Arizona, you know, like digging holes through caliche, you know. So for me, the hard work was, I kind of embraced it, and I knew that was going to be my way up the ladder. And it's helpful that I'm not dumb and I drink a lot, so I have a good palate. But yeah, so I just kind of spent 8 years working for the Harlan family across. I did 2 vintages at the reserve as an intern. Then I spent a season working for Fruition Sciences, where I was able to see some of like the greatest vineyards basically in California, working, you know, Donna Estates, some of those properties, Cake Bread, some of their mountain vineyards, Dariush, their mountain stuff, Chimney Rock, some other places, Schaefer.
Yep. Just keep name dropping.
Yeah, exactly. And then Corey, the winemaker at Harlan, offered me an internship, kind of a full year, 6 months in the vineyard, working with Mary Marr, who is this legendary viticulturist in Napa, and then 6 months in the cellar at Harlan Bond. So, yeah,
how long do you have to think about that one?
Yeah, no, 0.2 seconds. And I was offered another position at another really nice winery, and I turned them down because it's kind of like, you know,
they took a chance on you. You might as well stay.
Yeah, no, for sure. And like I really love those people. They're great people. They're hardworking. They're super intelligent. They're always on the cutting edge. And there's a reason why those wines have been so great for so long. And I think they only continue to improve, honestly.
I've never had them, so I wouldn't. But thanks for telling me that.
Yeah, no, for sure. Let's talk about them some more.
Okay,
but yeah.
please. Well, let me ask you this: what is the best advice you'd give someone that's younger, you know, a kid maybe, or even midlife crisis like myself? I'm not really. Well, maybe I am, or what have you, that are looking to change your. What is the best advice you can give someone trying to start in the wine business, especially as a winemaker?
Oh, I would say work as hard as you can and just absorb as much as you can without talking for as long as you can.
You should do that with the podcast. We should just stay here.
Just to stay here. It's a little bit different, but like,
right.
I knew that I had to work my way up because I didn't have the winemaking degree. And so when the cellar master hands you a scrub brush and says, "We need this room scrubbed," you know, and 90% of wine is sanitation, and like that's not true. Of course, it's not totally true, but
right.
like the process.
But it's the same thing with cooking too.
Yeah.
Like you got to wash dishes, you got to sanitize.
100%.
Right, exactly.
It's the same preparation is the key to the game, and especially when you think about like microbial spoilage and all these organisms that can get into wine and affect everything. And so really it's just kind of like getting zen about cleaning and shoveling out tanks and listening to people that have more experience than you. And that was, I think, the key for me. And so I remember like Bob Levy didn't talk to me for like 2 years. You know what I mean? Like I was just the intern. So he would like look in my direction, maybe the second harvest I worked for him. But after the second harvest, like I'll never forget, he was walking by and then like he just talked to me. He's like, "So I heard you're going to be starting in Harlan next year." And I was like, "Yeah." And he's like, he just gave me a thumbs up and he nodded at me. And I was like,
yeah,
woo! Like I was like being
high five.
Yeah, being like tapped.
You should have asked him if you could have had a hug.
Oh no! So
might have been pushed
he might have thrown the ball at me if I did that. But no, great dude, Bob.
But that's true though. I mean, you got to put your time in, and especially if you don't maybe have the family connection, but even if you have the family connection, you got to put the time in.
For sure. And I really respect the Harlans too, not to make this about them right now,
Right.
but like Amanda and Will, the Bill's kids, and I know Amanda really well because we actually worked a vintage in the cellar together in 2014 at Bond, just spinning barrels. And so like those guys put the time in, they've gone to school and they put the time in. And I find a lot of people, they want to be a winemaker after 2 years and they're 24, 25, and they want to be the head winemaker.
Yeah.
And it's like, man, winemaking is kind of like analogous to cooking too, where, like, to your point, preparation, everything's got to be right, everything's got to be clean, but it's different because in cooking, you can do 200 covers a night. So you might have 40 chances of those 200 covers to make the same dish, and by the end of that service to have perfected that dish, whereas in winemaking, you get one service a year, and you have one chance a year to hit that. I kind of forgot where I was going with that analogy.
No, but that's true though. I mean, I think, unfortunately, a lot of people, it's they want to be like, the all-star right off the bat, and you got to put your time in, right? You got to take your licks and pay your dues.
For sure. And I remember where I was going now. And so to think about it as in terms of that, like it's one service a year. It's like these people that now have seen 30 vintages, those are the people to listen to because they've seen everything, right? And they have the most experience with the most different variability in the vineyards and in the cellars and the vintages and all that.
They've made the mistakes.
They've made the mistakes. And so it's really easy to be like, I like these wines, and and the older I get, the more I'm just like old man yelling at cloud. You know what I mean? Like, you guys don't know anything because you haven't drank anything, and you don't know how to make anything because you haven't lived long enough. Like I'm becoming a dinosaur in terms of that sense. But I think it's very, very true, especially in terms of winemaking. I don't think winemakers really hit their peak and probably till they're 50.
Yeah, you got some time, boss.
Yeah, my wines are great now, and they're only going to get better.
So how long you've been at Merryvale?
A little over 2 years.
Okay.
So the previous winemaker, Simon Faury, is now at Crown Point down on Central Coast.
Who connected us?
Yeah, exactly. Simon, awesome dude.
Yep.
French.
Yep.
So painfully French.
Yeah.
Who
he surfs.
Yeah. Oh, he's great. He's like a French surfing cowboy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for those of you that
who likes, and we had him on the podcast.
Right.
I was at Crown Point last year, and I swear to God, he loves driving the Gator. That's the only reason he works there.
Yeah,
he has keys to the Gator. I
think he wishes he was born Texan. He's from Lyon, and I think he just wishes he was from.
Well, Lyon is a lot like, I've been to Lyon, Jet de l'eau. Lyon is, what was it? Pete in the River. I don't remember, but whatever. Here nor there. Lyon's a lot like Texas, a lot like Dallas. Now maybe more like Austin. Good barbecue.
Yeah, I can see that. Austin, I can see Austin for sure.
So
they also support UT.
Well, that too. Did you know him before?
We were interns in the Harlan system together in 2012. He was an intern at Promontory when I was an intern at the Reserve. And the current winemaker of Promontory, David Chili, an Italian guy from Siena, he was an intern at Harlan and Bond. So we were kind of all interns there at the same time. Obviously, those guys come from European pedigree and winemaking schools, and I do not.
Right.
So,
it's literally, they weren't breastfed milk; they're breastfed wine.
That's true. Yeah.
The Italians,
it shows.
Especially. Yeah, I know exactly.
So I came in 2019. Simone it was a bit of a handoff vintage. So I had just finished pressing out the very last tank of the Reserve on October 30th, and October 31st, Halloween Day, I started here. So I didn't take any time off because obviously it's the tail end of harvest, and so we still had full tanks of wine, and so I'm draining and pressing here as well. So Simon picked the fruit and started the fermentations in 19, and then I kind of finished that vintage and did all the blending, as well as blended and bottled the 18s.
Okay.
So, but that being said, Simone and I were roommates also for a couple of years in the middle there before I met my current wife. So I had been tasting these Merryvales kind of in the cellar, for years as well.
So you're kind of familiar with the style and kind of the background and the kind of the history.
100%. And, when I was, just kind of coming up drinking and learning, it's like Merryvale was such an iconic winery to me. Mm-hmm. Family owned since the repeal of Prohibition. It was the first winery the Mondavi's owned. Cesare Mondavi first purchased
Which is
winery.
crazy.
It's crazy, the history. So
Bill Harlan was involved here too, wasn't it? I mean,
the whole.
They had some awful names before it was Merryvale, though, let's be honest.
A Sunny St. Helena?
Yeah, that's horrible.
I kind of want to just do a Sunny St. Helena rosé label.
That would be okay.
I feel like that would work.
Yeah. I just don't do a Cabernet.
No.
Or a red blend.
We'd call it. Yeah, no, for sure. But yeah, so like Peter Mondavi and Robert Mondavi were kids, like where we're sitting and talking right now. And this is where they learned how to make wine. And like the pedigree of this place is so amazing, and the vineyards are so world class. Planted by David Abreu and designed by Levy and Michel Roland. So to me, Merryvale was always this kind of icon, and obviously, being owned by Harlan through the 80s and having Bob Levy be their winemaker, and then transitioning into the Schlatter families in the 90s, they've kind of kept kind of that lineage alive, and so I'm very honored to be like a steward. I feel like of that to a certain degree.
And I always think, sorry to cut you off, I always think like Merryvale, like it's consistent, it's always good, but I always thought Merryvale like sold like 5 years ago, 6-7 years ago to like Constellation or something like that, or Terlato or something like that. You know what I mean? I don't know why.
I think it's because it's on the side of the road on Highway 29. It gets a lot of traffic. A lot of these
across from
wineries
Gott's.
right across from Gott's.
Yeah.
Next to Trevina Pizzeria.
Yeah.
Charter Oak.
Yeah.
Farmstead.
Yeah.
Shout out my friends.
I love Farmstead.
Yeah, me too, man.
I
got
love
married
all
at
those places.
Farmstead. I
Did
met
you
my
really?
wife at Farmstead. I got married at Farmstead.
Really?
Yeah.
You met her at a bar. No, you met her at a nice restaurant. Did she work there?
I like to say I met her at a bar. I keep it old school like that.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. We
Farmstead's
didn't meet
a great
online.
place.
We met at a bar. It's like, yeah.
Online. A bar online.
We actually swiped right. We were at the same bar together. We didn't know.
That's hilarious. So that's the thing. I mean, it's you pass it. It's been around forever, and the history and the lineage is phenomenal.
It's off the charts.
Yeah. How many wines do you guys make at Merryvale? And I know you said a little bit about Starmont too, which is kind of their entry level, let's say.
Sister label, a little bit more affordable, kind of everyday, kind of $20 to $30 range.
Do you play with those wines or no?
They have their own winemaker. Jeff Crawford is an awesome dude who's been their winemaker for a long time. Him and I have similar palate and style, so we taste each other's wines and offer feedback and all that kind of stuff too. But no, they have their own stuff. But yeah, so I think people don't think of Merryvale, or they think of it's sold because it's just kind of one of those wineries that never really went new school Napa. It's kind of like old classic Napa in the way that it was maybe in the 60s and the 70s. It's not been updated, as you can see. This room we're in, it hasn't been updated, it hasn't been touched.
Yeah, there's no heating either.
Now we've modernized that. Well, not in this room. I don't believe. There might be, but like we've modernized the tanks and all the winemaking is completely modern. But we use super old school techniques. So like stylistically, I think we should talk about maybe talk about the wines now. Stylistically, my palate is, I think, more classically European classic Napa than it is I'd say mid 2000s Napa, the big beast Napa. So I've always respected Merryvale's wines because they've always been classically made. And they've always had really great fruit sourcing. So to your question about the wines that we make Chardonnay from Carneros. We make Pinot Noir from Carneros. We had an estate vineyard down there, the 40 acres off the historic Stanley Ranch.
Okay.
So mostly Dijon clones for Pinot and clone 15 for Chardonnay. But I love Carneros as a region just because of the proximity to the San Pablo Bay, the maritime influence. You get almost like that salinity, the really bright acidity that comes through there. And we barrel ferment, so we make the wines in a classic Burgundian traditional method where the Chardonnays are whole cluster pressed, settle overnight in a tank, and then everything goes to barrel. It gets barrel fermented native. So I barrel ferment native. It goes through native primary and secondary fermentation, minimal sulfur, stir a couple times a week going through fermentation. But after that, we pretty much don't touch it and let it get kind of on the lees for a few months. Then we'll do one blend, rack to blend once, and then it ages for 18 months and it goes straight to bottle, like cross flow. So it's super old school Burgundian technique. Pinot's kind of the same way. I use about 30% stems that I add in back by weight. I don't do whole cluster. I've found, especially with working in some Carneros fruit, that sometimes if you do whole cluster, the interior berries don't actually ferment and explode, or they will do so later in the fermentation, release sugars later in fermentation, which is what you don't want. So I destem all my Pinots, but then I'll weigh out what I think are the best stems and layer them almost like a layer cake.
Interesting.
In the tank. It's an Argentine technique that they use for Malbec, for stem inclusion on Malbec, and I was kind of adapted it to Pinot. And I found it makes really great results, and I really love the qualities a little bit of stem inclusion gives you on Carneros Pinot. So we make Chardonnay and Pinot from Carneros, and then we make, of course, the bread and butter of Merryvale is red wine Cabernet. We have 25 acres in Conn Valley, so it's a great spot right above Heights. It's adjacent to one of the Bond vineyards for Coella. and it's on 4 different ridges with different elevation changes, slope orientations. So you have morning side sun, you have afternoon side sun, you have 900 feet elevation, you have 300 feet elevations. Yep. Yeah, it's awesome. Different clones, we've got awesome stuff there. And again, it's kind of classic. It's mountainside fruit, so it's a little bit more tannic, but if you don't, if you're not trying to over extract everything, if you just take what Napa gives you, I always think that, Napa never lacks for power. Napa lacks for restraint. Mm-hmm. Like I'm trying to make the most classical old world style wine influenced by, like, obviously where it's at, and just let the site drive that, so we're not picking when it's overripe, but we're also not picking when it's underripe too. And I feel like, I'm not going to name names, but there's a lot of like natural wines that have kind of come up recently, and those are fine. They're fine.
Yeah, they're fine.
They don't. I'll never forget this. I was in a blending session with Michel Roland. I'm just going to name drop this whole time, man.
Doing a good job.
We were talking about a winery that was kind of leaning more in towards that style, and he just said something that it's always stuck with me. He's like, those wines don't bring me pleasure. And this idea that wine is supposed to be pleasurable, and I don't know that I'd agree with that philosophically.
Those wines don't bring me pleasure.
That's those wines don't bring me pleasure, and I've always thought about that. And it's like, okay, what wines bring me pleasure? What am I looking for? And if I think that I have a good palate and I have confidence,
what wines bring you pleasure?
Man, it's almost an unanswerable question to a certain degree. But for me, I think those wines that, first off, on a technical level, they have to have like what I feel like is a tension, like a linear tension to that wine. It has to kind of take me on a little bit of a journey. It has to be complete. I guess it has to have a good attack, a nice mid palate, length on the finish. To me, all world-class wines have a long finish, mid palate structure, fine tannin if we're talking about red wine. But that's boring. No one wants to talk about structure, right? So the wines that bring me pleasure are the wines that evolve in the glass, that reward patience. They're the wines that make me think about what I'm drinking differently than if I would have thought about, before maybe. They're a wine that maybe like shifts my perspective, or they can really just be fucking good.
Yeah. Is there any regions or winemakers that you see that bottle maybe at dinner or at the, you're traveling for work or stuff and you see a bottle, I'm like, I'm going to pick this up because this brings me pleasure.
For sure. Like Loire Franc, always for me. Like Cru Beaujolais, I love that stuff. Rhone, Southern and Northern Rhone.
Speaking French, huh?
Super love it. Yeah, I guess I am. Also Italian wines. I really feel like a lot of Napa, especially the mountainside fruit, those tannins are more analogous to like Nebbiolo, Piedmontese wines, than anywhere else. And so I fall in love with those wines. And Sicilian whites, I love, that kind of style.
And it's funny because you're in, I call Napa the adult Disneyland.
Yeah, totally.
But I would say everyone I've talked to, if we've talked about this, everyone drinks old world European wines.
Yeah, we pretty much do.
Probably the 3 people that 3 or 4 that said that, whether it was off the air or on the air, said that. And I think it's funny because when I go out because I have my wine distributorship in Ohio, when I go out with a supplier or whatever, we'll drink beer or a cocktail, which is comical,
Right. No, we get together with winemakers and
I had a beer last night at dinner. I was just like, went to 3 great wineries yesterday, had some wine, and I had a freaking beer. I had German Pilsner.
Yeah.
It was good.
No, awesome. I mean, like every time we get together with winemakers, usually at Farmstead, it's martinis. It's just gin martinis. And I think a lot of that too is, at the end of the day,
why is that?
Well, you're tasting Napa Cab all day.
Yeah,
so you
that's
have
true.
A certain tannin load on the mouth, and you're just like, I just need something, clear and clean. I think that's a big part of it. But also, I feel like when we're talking about like high end Napa Valley Cabernets, I really believe that what brings me pleasure about those is like just the unctuousness of those wines and how special those wines can be. And so I really feel like I drink enough of those at work. I taste enough of those at work. And when I'm outside, I guess I'll take a step back. I don't drink a lot of Napa wines at home because I drink a lot of Napa wines at work, obviously. Right. But then I really like it when I do drink a Napa wine at home. If I don't drink it all the time, I had a great bottle the other night.
You can say
and it was, I forget the name of it now. So.
Wasn't that great?
Wasn't that great, or it was so great that it was anyway.
Yeah.
But it was a high end producer, and it was like a 10-year-old bottle, and it was probably like ridiculously expensive, and it was a gift. And we just moved, so we were just opening stuff that
whatever.
had to go.
Less to carry.
Or exactly.
Less to move.
Yeah,
right?
100%. And then it's like you have these wines, these Napa wines that are made at the high level, and then you just realize how special they are.
Yeah.
And then they bring me great deals of pleasure.
But you just don't remember it.
I just don't remember it.
Don't remember it.
I know it was a cab, right? It's Napa cab.
That's funny. So the Chardonnay is good. The cab. Would you say this is the workhorse, the Cabernet, Merryvale Cabernet?
This is the Merryvale St. Helena. This is
Okay.
2016. So this is 100% off of our estate in Conn Valley. This is the second wine off of the estate.
Okay.
The first wine being the Profile. And typically it tends to, I love this wine. It's a little bit more red fruit. We have volcanic soil up there. It's a little more red, kind of rustic, not rustic tannin, maybe a little gamier, kind of on that end of cab. And the Profile tends to be a little more refined, more elegant.
It's nice.
Silkier, leans more into, I would say, the savory.
What's that? The
The
Profile.
Profile next to it, yeah.
Okay.
So
The Profile's really good. You didn't pour me any Profile.
oh my God. Nine Sons was the name of that wine I had.
I never heard of it.
Nine
That's
Sons.
perfect.
Pritchard Hill.
Thanks.
Pritchard Hill, it's over there by Aubin.
Okay.
Super delicious.
So this is a Profile.
This is the Profile. This is the 18, so not necessarily a direct comparison. It's a little bit of a younger wine. Takes a little more time to open, but yeah, when you have a world-class vineyard like that, it's really fun to kind of blend the different blocks and just to see stylistically like how you can go in different directions. But yeah, 18's a great vintage.
Wow.
Yeah, lovely tannin. And I guess that's my thing too, where it's like everybody who talks shop in Napa always talks about, waxes poetic about these wines from the 60s and the 70s, like 60s Heights, Martha's Vineyard. It's like that's everybody's go-to like benchmark for wine. And then they're making these like crazy wines that have residual sugar and they're 100% new oak and they're 60% alcohol. And you're like, no, you don't like those wines. Like you do not like those wines at all. And I don't know that these wines are that wine either. But at the same time, they're made in that kind of that vein, that philosophical vein, like to continue on my rant about the natural wines. Like I think you can go too far in the other direction too, and those wines don't bring me pleasure. And then these wines do bring me pleasure, because they're not overripe. When you pick overripe and you use 100% new oak and you over extract in the cellar, what you're doing is you're just like you're blowing out that fruit, you're cooking that fruit. You're taking something that was, beautiful, that was made like in a garden, essentially. The way these vineyards are manicured in Napa, and you're kind of destroying it. Like you're destroying something.
Why do you think people do that?
It makes them more money.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's it. And with the disintegration, I feel like of like Advocate and Spectator, like the proliferation now you see of people like scoring wines. Like blogs like just like Galoni or Dunnock or whatever, and
Cork and Taylor, CT.
Yeah, right.
Everything's 100 points.
Everything's 100 points. No, but there is that drive to score high and to make a wine that is impactful. And it's no secret that the wines that are that are more oaky and more extracted make more of an impact, especially in a lineup with something like Merryvale, which is way more classic. And I find it's best enjoyed. I don't know, like there's something about like tasting 10 Napa Valley wines and being like, yeah, look at all the Napa Valley wines we drank last night. And it's like, okay.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, all right.
I'm not going to say where I see that consistently, but yeah.
So for me, like these wines bring me great pleasure because they're made like kind of right in that pocket.
Right. Well, let me ask you this. Is it the owners pushing the winemaker to do that style? Is it the winemaker that might be the vintner and the owner doing it? I mean, what's driving that? The American palate? I mean,
it's kind of all of the
checkbook.
above. I mean, it depends because America, 350 million people, like across a continent. Like there's so many different pockets of what people want to consume, and there's a style for everybody. And I think it's a combination of all of those things, right? So like I'm fortunate here at Merryvale where it's kind of old school. It's been family owned the whole time. The current proprietors are Schlatter family, it's Swiss family. And so they have that, and like in Laurence, the owner, her her father is a 7th generation Swiss
Right.
winemaker.
Yeah, I was reading.
You
yeah,
know, so
yeah.
like they have that philosophy.
They understand
where,
it, yep.
they want wine that they want to age to be able to lay down for 30 years. They want wine that they want to be able to drink. They want that kind of classic, great balance, acidity, freshness. You still want the fruit. You still want the core. You still want the length.
Right.
You still want the depth. The volume of the wine is really important. But like in that more kind of classical sense, and so in that sense, it's more of a marriage of winemaker and owner. So philosophically, we agree, and because I think it'd be really hard to work for somebody that's like, hey, blow out. I want 100 points. I want you to do like 4 volumes of pump overs a day, 100%, new French oak with a good portion of heavy toast in there, and then we're gonna put it into a 10-pound bottle, and we're gonna see what happens.
But I have heard a story, and I don't know who told me this. Is that when winemakers will send 2 bottles to the ratings and they know how to get 100 points, and then they'll put on the market what they want to put out. Can you confirm or deny that?
No. Yeah. I mean, it's a game.
Yeah.
The whole thing is kind of a game,
But that's a world we live in.
That's
I hate
the
to
world
break it's smoke and mirrors. I mean, everything we do on a daily basis is kind of a game.
for sure. And
It's unfortunate, but that's,
if anything, it's more of the reality than the reality that we had in the 80s and the 90s with somebody like Parker, where we think is like this benevolent, like he's doing everything for the greater good, and it's all like on the level. And maybe it was. I don't know. I'm not here to cast suspicion, but.
Right.
There was a certain legit when it was the Advocate and it was Spectator and it was like everything is blind, and then like for like there was a good 20 years there where people were like like okay, this is kind of on the up and up, and then it kind of course becomes what it is now when you realize is everything is done kind of like in that, I don't know.
When there was 2 wines in the top 50 a couple years in the top 100 wine spectator, I think they've come back. Like this year's top 100, I think is legitimate, but like a couple of years ago, maybe. I don't know if it was 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years ago, they had 2 wines, and I'm not going to say one was a $20 Pinot, and the other one was a Napa Chard, and I just won't say it.
Sure.
Meiomi and Rombauer. When they're in the top 50,
remember your wines?
Come on, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's a joke.
And listen, I am not knocking Rombauer. I am not knocking the Wagner family or Camus or Meiomi. I'm not knocking.
No, man, they make some nice wines.
Exactly, they do well. It fits someone's palate. It brings someone pleasure. It just does. It brings someone pleasure. And that's the beautiful thing about wine. It's all subjective. But, like, come on, Wine Spectator, seriously, like Rombauer, Chardonnay, and Meiomi.
Yeah.
Like, come on.
Yeah. No, for sure. And that's why it's kind of like I don't see the point in like creating wine to score high. I'm always like, what's the best version of wine that I can create? Like, what is the platonic? It's almost more like philosophically, what is the platonic ideal of wine I can create off of this specific block? And then from there, extrapolate that out. What is the best version of wine that Profile Vineyard can produce? And how do I tap into that? And that has nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with the site and like kind of like the vibe of the winery and like because I think people talk about terroir all the time. Well, terroir is also the cellar. Of course, that's the other side of that equation. The people that make the wine, the energy in the cellar, the vibe that they're having, like that all contributes, because the grapes show up. The grapes are the raw ingredient. The grapes showing up is when the chef has the delivery at the door. That's half of it, but that's half of it. It's true that great wine starts in the vineyard, but this idea that great wine is made in the vineyard to me is a bit laughable. It's not. It's made in the cellar. It started in the vineyard, certainly. And
because that's the question: is it the vineyard or the winemaker?
It's a combination of both.
Yeah.
I mean, you can deliver the same crate of strawberries.
It's the chicken and the egg theory.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, let's deliver a crate of strawberries to like 5 restaurants around town and see what's what.
Yeah, but that's if you get 4 of your colleagues or 4 of your close friends that are winemakers. You give them all the same grapes. You might do something. There's probably going to be a lot of variation, right?
There's going to be a lot of variation. There's going to be a lot. There's going to be a lot of overlap,
right?
For sure, but there will be variation, and I think that's what makes it interesting. Now that said, I think that there will be like stratification in quality for sure, and I think that's what's interesting too. So it's like, yeah, it's all variable.
Yep.
Completely. And I also think it depends on, getting nerdy with like technicalities too, where it's like native fermentation versus, inoculation in the terroir of your cellar, because every cellar has its own native culture that's been built up over years. And so a place like Merryvale, we have yeast, like, I don't even know what the melange of stuff here is. We should, we can go get a DNA tested at ETS, but when you're fermenting, those using native yeast in the first third of fermentation really boost, I think, your aromatic profile, and it really highlights those. But then after a certain point of fermentation, the commercial yeast that lives in your cellar overtakes everything else anyway, and finishes it. So different wineries will actually have different strains of those yeasts built up over time. And then they have different native strains that are, in the vineyard. And this is now we're talking about farming. And so if you farm conventionally, you're basically killing all your native, microflora and fauna out there. So your native yeast populations are going to be a lot more diminished. If you farm organically, like we do, use biodynamics, you're going to have a really vibrant native yeast population, and you're going to really be able to pop some different kind of nuances into your wines. Yeah, I feel like I was ranting there, but so it's a combination. It's what you've done in the vineyard and how you've treated that in the cellar. So like for myself, like I love native ferments. Like just go crazy. They get a little more reductive. Maybe you have to like treat it. You have to kind of keep up on them a little more. But I just find the aromatic interest to be so much greater in a lot of sense. But I do experiment also with like some inoculated stuff too, and that's like just to play with it. And I think it's also important that we're always experimenting too, to be on the front edge. And I've been waxing poetic about using kind of old school techniques and methods, but old school winemakers were also still trying to figure out what's the new best thing, what's the best way to treat this. I mean, that like, I'm not into regressive winemaking. I'm into being progressively classic, I guess I would say. Yeah. So trying to find that balance.
Awesome. So you're going to stick around. Wines are great. We're going to talk some more. Andrew, thank you for joining us on the Cork and Taylor Wine Podcast. Remember to subscribe, rate, and review.